Hi! Pinball games! Let's go! Wait, come back! Come on now, don't be like that. You've played pinball games before, right? Right? Well, now that I think about it, I haven't played any pinball games in years. So why not talk about them a little? I've got a few really old ones here that I used to play back in the day, and I thought I'd go over them and see what makes them special. Alright, look, I'm just gonna get into it, okay? We'll figure everything out along the way. What do you even need for a pinball game? I'm gonna say a ball, some flippers, and a plunger. That's the bare minimum. I'm also going to assume some sort of contained playfield and a way to score points. That's pinball. When I was but a wee lad, I remember playing with a homemade wooden pinball game where you used a stick to shoot a ball into these pockets made out of pins for points. In more modern pinball machines, you have stuff like bumpers, kickers, targets, spinners, switches, ramps, gates, and a whole bunch of other things to interact with. The more of those things you want to implement in a video game, the more complicated things will get. I talked about arcade games in a previous video, and a lot of the replay value comes from setting your own goals. Now, as these are pinball games, the most obvious goal you can set is reaching a certain high score. The problem with that is, well, it's been over 30 years! I have no recollection of what my high scores might have been. I don't know what's a high or a low number. So, for this particular set of games, I went without any in-game goals. Let's get this ball rolling. Night Mission Pinball by Sublogic, this game right here, was, to the best of my knowledge, the first pinball game ever ported to the PC. It came out in 1983 in 4-color CGA. This is the baseline, right? Let's talk about what we have here. The Night Mission manual makes a big deal of listing every object available, giving you the illusion that there's a lot going on. And there is, relative to 83, but take a closer look at the playfield here. You'll notice that the lower half is largely empty, with nothing interesting really happening over there. Night Mission also doesn't have ramps implemented at all, for example. Considering the graphics and resolution, that could have looked pretty messy anyway. The animations and effects are extremely minimal. The theme here is a World War II night bombing run in a B-17 Flying Fortress. For example, I think hitting the rollovers at the top is supposed to represent bombing cities? Cause that's the mood we want, huh? Considering there's a few actual wars going on at the time of recording, the theme doesn't really do it for me, to say the least. Theming in pinball games is there to give meaning to the different ways of scoring points, usually by hitting bumpers, targets, rollovers, spinners, and various other objects. Usually, hitting certain targets in sequence will trigger scoring opportunities and special features, but for Night Mission, trying to glean these from the manual or the in-game instructions is very much beyond me. The point is, the longer you can keep hitting the ball at different targets, the more exponential the effect on your score will likely be. There's a whole bunch of settings that you can use to tweak the game to your liking. For example, in easy mode, there's a stopper between your flippers that makes it difficult for the ball to simply pass between them, and the kickers next to your flippers are turned off. Something feels a little off about this though. Like it's meant for people who enjoy the simulation aspect of fine-tuning their perfect pinball experience. Personally, I'd rather have the game itself already be fine-tuned for me, rather than having to do it myself. There's also a self-play mode where the game basically plays itself, intended mostly to verify how your settings work. I gave normal mode a try and... yeah... Look, I get it, it's 1983 and people don't really have established game design conventions yet, but having a 3-ball gap between your flippers is a little much, isn't it? I guess having a working tilt system would help offset that, but the instructions are kinda whimsical, and pressing keys on the right half of the keyboard doesn't do anything, whatever that might mean. It's also really easy to drain your ball into the out lane at the left side. The physics aren't really there either. It feels like I'm playing with a rubber ball that bounces around wildly and doesn't have any weight to it. It's just not very fun to play, and ends up feeling kind of like a one and done deal. There's no music in the game, with the sounds implemented via PC speaker. There's this horrid cacophony going on what's supposed to represent the engine drone of a B-17 bomber in flight. Luckily, you can turn that off from the settings, but even that necessitates reading through the manual, because for some reason navigating them is less than intuitive. Speaking of settings, you're supposed to be able to save those by pressing Ctrl W, but that didn't work either. Version 3.0 of the game came out 5 years later, in 1988, with supposedly improved physics and support for 16-color game modes. It's still the same table though, with all of its drawbacks, so I'm not going to say much else about it. The expiration date for Night Mission Pinball has long since come and gone, but you can still find it available at abandonware sites, should you find the nostalgic pull irresistible. There are surely people with fond memories of playing this game in their younger years, and I'm not here to throw shade on any of that. It's just that I never played this game, and the passage of time can't have gilded said memories from me, because they don't exist. I do have memories of this next game though. Let's jump forward 8 years and see what wonders await us. Tristan Pinball, otherwise known as
Solid State Pinball, Tristan,
was made by Little Wing and published by
Amtech Software Corporation
in 1991. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. We have Sound Blaster and Adlib sound, along with better resolution via VGA graphics. Although the table looks so crisp that at first glance I thought they were only using 16 colors to make this happen. The sound effects in general feel more thought out in contrast to the constant assault of PC speaker noise in the previous game. There's something here that feels solid, right from the get-go. I don't have to tweak any settings compared to Night Mission for the game to just work. The soundscape isn't invasive, the speed feels good, the table is bright and clear, and most of all, the balls have weight to them.
Phrasing?
You can estimate the trajectory of the ball much better here, and it doesn't bounce around wildly like in Night Mission. Thanks to the better resolution, a lot of small labels are visible at various points around the table, making it intuitively easy to understand what hitting most objects will do, and what effects are currently active. Night Mission only has seemingly arbitrary score labels next to most of the lanes and a few other objects, which mostly serve just to clutter up the table visually and are largely unneeded. There's also a text box in Tristan specifically dedicated to explaining what's happening during the action, and it's also used for the special Tristan bonus roulette. There is no need to consult a separate manual to figure out what's going on. The theme is some kind of vaguely Arthurian fantasy. The game doesn't make a big deal about it. It keeps it surprisingly low-key. I love the heraldry on display here.
Azure, across hum eddy, at the fess point of pinball argent, winged of the same, in chief aroundel ghouls, radiant, representing a bumper, the whole debruised by a sword pale wise.
Now, compared to Night Mission, the space between flippers makes much more sense in my opinion. You can fit less than 2 balls between those suckers, if you know what I mean.
Phrasing.
It feels more fair this way. Also, the outlanes on both sides have kickers that start as active, returning the ball into the playfield if you're unlucky. It's fairly hard to hit the ball into the outlane in the first place. There's far less sense of losing balls to random chance in this game. Sadly though, there aren't any ramps in Tristan either. There's actually a decidedly less engineer-oriented manual for Tristan, and the original game box seemed to have come with an actual pinball inside it. That's pretty cool. It contains a brief blurb about the history of pinball, whereas the Night Mission manual had a list of pinball jargon at the end, which I found pretty amusing. It also contains a list of supposed pinball techniques that you can actually replicate in-game. Stuff like the double flip, the deflect pass, and the dead flipper bounce. I don't know if these can or should be taken seriously. You pinball experts out there can let me know. While researching this video, I found out that Little Wing had released several pinball games in addition to Tristan. It might not sound that surprising, as that's what you'd expect Little Wing to do, but I honestly never even thought about it. I'm definitely going to give them a try. 50 million points, by the way. I am champion. Little Wing as a company still exists today, and you can download demo versions of their pinball games for free on their website. Should you wish to buy the full versions, those are there as well. I'll leave a link for that in the description. So yeah, Tristan is an obvious upgrade over Night Mission. There's 8 years of technological development between the games, so it's no real surprise, and it may be a bit of an unfair comparison, all things considered. Tristan was the first pinball game for me though, so that's the earliest pinball reference point that I can give you as far as my experience goes. Let's see how things have changed 4 years later. Space Cadet 3D Pinball was made in 1995 by Cinematronics and published by Maxis Software. Now, these are VGA graphics, plain and evident. I don't actually know what the 3D part is referring to. This game is as 2D as they come. Maybe they were referring to the perspective. You can see how the table is slightly tilted at an angle, like an actual pinball table would be. There's also sound, but more importantly, there's even music in this one. I preferred it off though, as that's the default setting. Space Cadet as a pinball table was included in a game called Full Tilt Pinball, released later in the same year. There's a ton of people who will recall this game for obvious reasons. It was originally packaged with Windows 95 Plus, 98, NT4, 2000, ME and XP, which I specifically remember playing this on. Rarely has there been a single pinball game so ubiquitously available as Space Cadet Pinball. As far as the theme goes, it's some form of sci-fi Space Force scenario where you complete various missions to increase in rank. Speaking of which, in Tristan, the biggest scoring opportunity is lighting up the magic lights at the center of the table. In Space Cadet, the current mission determines what targets you need to hit. Space Cadet has a feature that I sorely missed in the previous games. Using your flippers to switch the active lights at the rollovers at the top area. This was supposed to be a feature in Night Mission as well according to the manual, but unsurprisingly I could never get it to work. This small change gives me a little bit more to do when the ball is busy at the top area of the table. Another special feature here is tied to your plunger. Launching the ball will activate lights on the way up to the playfield, and if you don't quite reach the playfield, you will score a skill shot depending on the number of activated lights, but you essentially forego any early scoring in the top area this way. Also, compared to Tristan, you now have 2 separate text displays that can fit a lot more information if you happen to have the time to read it. Now, I've already mentioned them a few times in this video, but this pinball table finally has ramps. I like ramps. Ramps let the ball travel across the table, over other objects, and sometimes even lead to mini playfields. Of which Space Cadet has a perfect example here with those 3 mini bumpers. You can switch the rollover lights here in the same way you can those at the top, once again giving you a little something to do as you watch the ball do its thing. As far as difficulty goes, we're back to 3 ball spacing, huh?
Phrasing. Shut up!
Not a fan. It's actually a little more than 3 balls, but the difference is only a few pixels. At least Night Mission had variable difficulty where there was an active stopper between your flippers if you played on easy mode. In Space Cadet, it's a privilege that you have to activate separately, like extra or locked balls. Now, discounting outlanes and inlanes, Tristan has around 11 targets to hit. They're all relatively straightforward and easily visible. I've counted rollover and bumper areas as one single target. Following the same method of counting, Space Cadet has around 16 to 20 targets to hit, giving you a little more stuff to hit, depending on how you count the northwestern corner. They're more difficult to spot though, so I might be missing some. For some reason, the self-play mode from Night Mission makes a return here, in the form of demo mode. I don't really see what the point of having this is. Would you really fire up a game so that you can watch it play itself? Don't answer that. Now, I think we can all agree on the main issue of games like Tristan and Space Cadet. There's not enough. And what I mean by that is, there's only one table, and no matter how much you might like the game, it'll start feeling samey sooner or later. Well, I've got a game here that fixes that particular issue, and is probably one of the best pinball games that I've ever played. Ever. Or that's what I would have said over 30 years ago. I don't think the game is as good as I remember it to be. We'll need to go 2 years back in time for this one. You can get Space Cadet 3D Pinball from pretty much anywhere for free. A quick Google is all you need. If you wanna try it out, then I'm happy to say that it runs on modern systems. You'll be playing within minutes. Epic Pinball was made by Digital Extremes and published by
Epic Mega Games.
in 1993. It's based on an earlier set of pinball games called Silver Ball, released in the same year. It was a first attempt with many similarities to Epic, although it's a bit rough around the edges. We've got gorgeous VGA graphics and some absolutely fantastic music going on here. One of the first things you'll notice when compared to the previous games is the zoomed in view. You're no longer seeing the entire table while playing, but rather a small slice of it. On one hand, it allows for adding much more detail into the tables themselves, but on the other, it's a bit harder to estimate the trajectory of the ball because you can't always see your flippers. The second thing is, well, the amount of tables available. Most of them are great. We're going on deep sea adventures, building androids, and pondering a legendary sword, among other things. Looking back, I was playing Release Pack 2 when I first played the game. All 3 packs, including African Safari, had a CD release in 1995, which I never got. What I did get was the complete collection from GOG. I'll be honest though, I don't really like the tables in Release Pack 3. I kinda like Cybergirl, but the rest are pretty forgettable. Also, they changed the music for Android. Unforgivable. The original is still available in the demo version, but come on guys, why fix something that isn't broken? Thirdly, and this is a much smaller thing, But rather than having text boxes to display notifications, those are overlaid on top of the game screen itself. I found it slightly easier to read as the text is more or less where the action is happening, rather than having to look at a separate area of the screen. The thing about Epic when compared to single table games like the original Space Cadet and Tristan is that with the amount of different tables available, I care much less about chasing high scores. I find it much more enjoyable to simply concentrate on the game itself. I've added a label to keep track of which table we're using. The tables feel a little random in their scoring though. Look at that. 3,100 for Magic, huh? On the next table, bam! 117 million points. As you might expect, every table has its own set of rules and gimmicks, which are available to read at the table-specific options menu. One new mechanic here are secondary flippers that some tables have at the upper part of the table. I'll mention one level specifically here, Enigma. I won't spoil too much, but it's not a standard pinball table, and there's a sort of progression involved. You can tweak the number of balls and also the angle of the table at the settings menu. This apparently increases or decreases the relative gravity affecting your ball, making it fall faster or slower to the bottom of the table. The default game length of each table is set to 5 balls, and I'm beginning to see why. It just seems so easy to lose the ball between your flippers or to the out lanes. Why did they feel it was necessary to include those for all of the tables, by the way? I don't get it. It keeps happening over and over and over again. I can even speedrun some of these tables. Look! 38 seconds. That's how long I lasted. It very much feels like in order to do well, you need to master tilting to try and nudge the ball away when it's clearly headed between your flippers, as the manual very explicitly states. That feels like cheating though. Real-world pinball machines can detect if you're trying to fool around this way, and have different tolerance levels for these kind of shenanigans. All in all, Epic didn't really hit me the same way it did when I was a kid. The rose-tinted glasses kind of fell off and shattered. It has a solid foundation and plenty of things going for it, but the reliance on tilting just isn't for me. I'm not used to it at all. Like I said previously, I've been playing the Epic Pinball Complete Collection here, which you can find on GOG. If it comes on sale, you should be able to snag it for a few euros or dollars. And for that price, I'd still recommend it, despite my issues with it. I mentioned at the start that I haven't played too many pinball games in years, right? I gotta say, since Space Cadet, I haven't really played any pinball games since. I've been too distracted by other genres. Speaking of which, that's about to change. There's a new game in town, and we really don't know the exact date it's coming out, but it sure looks to be something right up my alley. The game is called Rogue Rollers, and it seems to combine pinball and roguelikes, one of my favorite genres. It's on my wishlist, and I'm low-key excited to see what the finished product would look like. Look at that. I want it. I hope you enjoyed this trip down the pinball memory lane as much as I did. I never thought I'd be rambling on about these kinds of games for as long as I have over the course of the video. But here we are. Games with a simple premise that's executed well are often the most addicting. I was worried that I wouldn't have a lot to say here, but when comparing the games with each other, I feel I was able to approach the matter in more detail. What I'm saying is, I'm happy I was able to get this one out there. In the next video, we'll be encountering more extraterrestrials again. Until then, have a nice day.
We're just done with phrasing, right? That's not a thing anymore?